So Alex Pereira, the current UFC light heavyweight champion, has had one of the most credentialed kickboxing careers in all of combat sports. And now to add on to that, he's added a great UFC resume. And with that being said, his UFC career has been nothing short of spectacular, adding 8 wins and being a 2-time champion in kickboxing as well as the UFC. So in this video today, I'm going to go through every single Alex Pereira fight that he has had in the UFC and give him a grade based on his performance. What I am not grading is how entertaining the fight was or how fun the finish was, just simply how well did Alex Pereira perform in his UFC career. So let's not waste any more time and let's dive right into me grading every single Alex Pereira performance that he has had in the UFC. So starting off with Alex Pereira's UFC debut, he is fighting Andreas Michailidis in this photo, and he got a spectacular TKO finish in the second round. He already had a pretty, I wouldn't say low level, but a pretty inexperienced MMA career, losing his MMA debut, but he went on to get 2 more wins after that. Then he gets into the UFC mainly because of his wins over Israel Adesanya in kickboxing, but overall his kickboxing resume, I believe, carried him more to that, to getting his shot in the UFC. So he fights Andreas Michailidis in his debut again, and he goes out there in the first round and he gets grappled up, gets clinched up by Andreas Michailidis. It's a pretty dull, a pretty boring first round, to be honest with you. But the second round comes out and we see Alex Pereira show off his explosiveness, and he goes out there, gets a flying knee TKO and kind of a weird stoppage, a little bit late. He was going for the walk-off KO. He really only needs one follow-up punch to secure himself the victory, but this win right here kind of got eyes opening up to Alex Pereira. If you didn't know who he was, you kind of knew who he was after this fight, but it didn't really answer any questions that we had about Alex Pereira. We kind of came into this fight wondering how good is his takedown defense really, and this fight didn't really sway us one way or another. We still had questions about what if he fights another real grappler at middleweight, how will he fare in those matchups? And Andreas Michailidis was the litmus test. He was the original test for Alex Pereira, and I believe he did pass with flying colors here, but he still just didn't answer all the questions that we had. I'm giving this performance just a B+, only because the first round, again, was pretty dull. He was getting clinched up, getting taken down, but he came out in the second round again and found the finish. So the finish does give him some points, but the first round does give him some negative points. A B+, you could give it an A, you could give it an A-. I don't care what you do. Personally, in my humble opinion, I'm only giving this just a B+ because of that first round, since it didn't answer too many questions that we had about Alex Pereira's takedown defense. We move on to his next fight against Bruno Silva. Now, Bruno Silva at the time was kind of on a decent hot streak, I believe. He was a highly ranked middleweight at the time. He was close to the rankings. This actually was a big jump up for Alex Pereira. Bruno Silva was definitely no scrub. He was not to be messed with. And so personally, I was pretty convinced Pereira was going to win this matchup going into it. But again, it seemed maybe a bit risky at the time. But he goes out there and has a pretty, I would say, close fight with Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva, not really a grappler. Again, another favorable matchup for Pereira so far in his career. Michailidis could grapple, but he wasn't really that good. Bruno Silva was good on the feet, but not really known for his grappling. So the UFC already was pretty much trying to take their time or give favorable matchups to Pereira. But he fights Bruno Silva, and it's a really close competitive fight, and he ends up winning 30-27 on all the judges' scorecards. Personally, he might have lost a round in there. Again, a pretty close fight, but overall, he proved to be the better fighter than Bruno Silva, and he was the better striker, obviously. Now, honestly, I believe this fight actually lowered the stock of Alex Pereira because Bruno Silva was able to tag him on the feet a few times. So it kind of felt like anybody, or maybe an Israel Adesanya at the time, maybe he could find the shots necessary to outpoint Alex Pereira in this matchup. Looking at the fight as a whole, it wasn't the most exciting fight. It wasn't the best Pereira performance, if I'm being honest with you, but he was able to hurt Bruno Silva a couple times in that third round. He definitely proved to be, again, the better striker of the two of them. I think he won pretty convincingly, 29-28 or even 30-27. I don't really care what you score, but he won convincingly. But again, this fight still didn't answer any questions that we had revolving around Alex Pereira. Bruno Silva, again, not a grappler, so we still don't know how good his takedown defense was. I believe Silva shot a few takedowns, but none of them were really good. I think they all were stuffed. So again, giving a grade on this, I'm giving it probably just a C plus. At best, a C plus. He proved to be a good striker, but we already knew that about Alex Pereira. We already knew with his kickboxing credentials that he was a good striker, but we still didn't know how good the takedown defense was. And even though he beat Bruno Silva, him landing shots on his chin and making this fight competitive was pretty worrying. And now that we look back on this fight, Bruno Silva, it's kind of amazing how he even survived this fight versus Alex Pereira. You can even argue the fact that Pereira took his chin and put too much damage on him and made him a worse fighter after this. But still, this fight is only a C plus for me, just for the fact that Pereira still showed holes in his striking game, as well as we didn't get the questions that we wanted answered with his takedown defense. But we move on to his first fight in the rankings against Sean Strickland. Now, this was a really big jump up, and we don't really see anybody really go from fighting Andreas Michailidis and then 2 fights later fighting Sean Strickland, who I believe was ranked like in the top 10 at the time. It was really, really rare. So you knew the UFC was trying to rush this guy to fight Adesanya because he was losing contenders fast. He was beating all of them, maybe in a boring style, but still he was beating all of his contenders. So the next guy up that the UFC wanted to push was Alex Pereira. So they give him Sean Strickland. Now, at the time, if I'm being honest with you, I was picking Strickland to win this. He showed that he could grapple in the UFC. When he fought at welterweight, he grappled. When he fought Uriah Hall just a few fights before this, he showed that he could grapple. But you know what? Sean Strickland went out there with one of the worst game plans you could ever have against a 2-time Glory kickboxing world champion in 2 different weight classes. He went out there and decided to not grapple and just decided to strike with Alex Pereira, and he paid the price. His style, Strickland style, is not suited to fight a guy that's as good as Alex Pereira. He's really open to that left hook, and he gets put out in the first round, gets dropped with a left hook, and then gets it followed up with, I believe, a right hand from Pereira, and it puts him down. He gets TKO'd. Now, this fight, honestly, is kind of what really made us think that Pereira has a chance against Israel Adesanya. At the time, we didn't really know how good Strickland was. We didn't think that he could possibly ever beat Adesanya and then go on to beat Adesanya. But we kind of were underselling how good Strickland was. In hindsight, it's actually a really good win. But at this time, at this moment in time, we kind of expected that Strickland was more of a top 10, and that was really about it. Never a future champion in our minds. He would later prove us wrong. This fight was kind of the staple that made us think that Pereira could beat Israel Adesanya. He was fighting Cannonier on that night. So if Pereira won, there was a very strong chance that he would later fight Israel Adesanya. It ended up being true. We had Pereira win by first round TKO, and then we had Adesanya win by a pretty dull decision versus Cannonier. And this felt really badass because we had this next guy who was Adesanya's boogeyman in kickboxing getting a first round finish over Strickland. He felt like he was next. He got a crazy KO. He had to be next if Adesanya beat Cannonier, which he did. And guess what? He gets his title shot next. But let me grade this fight first. I'm giving this fight a solid A plus. You can give it either or. I'm giving it an A because this was the point where we knew that Alex Pereira was the truth, that he is going to be good at middleweight, that he does have a chance versus Israel Adesanya, because guess what? The grappling doesn't matter because Adesanya is a striker. We knew what we were getting. We're getting Alex Pereira, a kickboxer, versus Israel Adesanya, a kickboxer. So that means we're getting a kickboxing matchup. And we've already seen that happen twice in the past. So we knew we were getting a good fight, and Pereira had a real shot at beating him. This fight made us really think that Pereira was a true top contender at middleweight. It's an A+ for me. But we move on to Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya, 1 in the UFC, 3 overall. And this fight, I'm actually going to give it a lower score, and you might be surprised by this. The reason why I'm giving this a lower score is the fact that Pereira had to get a comeback win versus Israel Adesanya. Now, when we go through this fight, Pereira was winning that first round. Then he gets caught with an overhand right that would later KO him in the second fight that they had. Pereira would end up losing that first round, go out in the second round, and then I believe just barely outpoint with leg kicks versus Adesanya. Then get grappled up in the third round, then be gassed in the fourth round and not be able to get his wind back underneath of him, and then get outpointed by Adesanya. Then come out there in the fifth round where we felt like he needed to get a finish. He was down 3-1, and he goes out there in that fifth round. He finds the left hook, then eventually finds that TKO versus Israel Adesanya. Now, the TKO itself, the finish itself, is one of the best moments, I believe, in UFC history. It is an unforgettable moment, but I am grading Pereira's performance overall in this fight, and he didn't have the best showing. Getting hurt in that first round, losing the third and fourth, didn't look good, but again, I have to give him some credit for getting the finish over Adesanya, so I'm going to give this just a B. Let's say he never finished Adesanya and just hurt him in that moment, and then Adesanya survived that round. He would lose the fight, and this would probably just be a C at best, probably a C-, maybe even a D+ at that point. But he finds that finish, and that really carries this grading for me. And again, having one of the best moments, not the best performance overall, but having a great moment at the end of it, gives it a B for me. I really do love this fight. I remember I was out of town that time. I was in New York in an Airbnb. I had to be quiet, but I still wanted to watch this fight, and I was going absolutely insane, just screaming, but the quiet scream was what I was doing. I was going insane for this fight, and I really enjoyed it. Again, the finish was spectacular, but we move on to the rematch. The sad rematch for Alex Pereira. Now, again, the finish in this fight was historical. This was one of the best finishes in UFC history. At that time, people had kind of lost some faith in Adesanya. He was having pretty boring fights like with Romero, with Cannonier, with Whitaker. Like, there wasn't too much stock in the excitement or entertainment value of Adesanya. And when he fought Pereira before this, again, not the most exciting fight up until the finish, and that was just all on Alex Pereira getting that finish. So Adesanya's stock at this point was probably the lowest it's ever been in his UFC career. But you know what? It didn't matter for Adesanya. He finds this KO and he gets the finish in the second round. Now, when it comes to Pereira's performance, this one probably is an F or a D. I'm going to give it a D because I think Pereira won that first round, and I think he was on his way to finishing Adesanya before he got KO'd. If you rewatch that KO, he had Adesanya hurt from the leg kicks and the body shots. It felt like he was about to finish him, but then Adesanya turned it around and got his own finish. You can say that he was trying to goad him in or whatever, but the body language did not look good for Adesanya. I don't care. In the first round, Pereira did win, and I think overall, when I walk away from this fight, I really did feel like that Pereira was the better striker than Adesanya. I felt like he was better on the feet. When that first fight happened, I thought Pereira won that first round before he got hurt, and he clearly won the second round after getting hurt. And in this fight, he also won the first round and was winning the second round before he got finished. So like, it really felt like that Pereira was the better fighter, but again, you got finished. This is one of the most incredible KOs. It comes at Alex Pereira's expense. When you're getting KO'd out cold like this, you're not going to get a good score. It's not, again, not his best performance ever, and it was his only loss in the UFC, by the way. I believe he's 8-1 in the UFC. This is his only loss. So it actually is his worst performance because he did lose. So I'm giving him a D pause only because he won that first round and he was winning the second round before he got finished. But we move on. He has to move on from middleweight entirely and go up another weight class because the weight cut down the middleweight was too much. So we get his 205, his light heavyweight debut against Jan Blachowicz in a 3-rounder. Now, talking about this fight, this was, again, not a good performance from Alex Pereira. He arguably could have lost this fight in hindsight. However, the judges did still score it in favor of him. But this fight overall just wasn't a crazy Alex Pereira performance. In the first round, he got his back taken and Blachowicz just sat on his back for the entirety of the round. This was at elevation, so both fighters seemed to gas, and it just wasn't a really high output, a really crazy fight. And the only reason that Pereira even won this fight was because he was able to, I guess, minorly outpoint Jan Blachowicz in the second and third round. And you can even argue that the third round goes to Jan Blachowicz. It's a very, very close fight, but nevertheless, Pereira still got the win. I can't knock him for not winning because the judges gave him the win. So I have to score this as if he won the fight, whether if I disagree or agree. If I'm being fully transparent with you, I do think he won this fight. But again, not the best Alex Pereira performance. It gets a C+. That's really about it because he won the fight. Mediocre performance at best. Again, not his best performance because elevation, he got grappled up in the first round and he arguably could have lost this by split decision. It is what it is. I do think Pereira has had better performances, which we're going to get into right now, which the next one we have is him versus Jiri Prochazka for the light heavyweight belt. Now, this performance, again, not a crazy Jiri performance outside of the KO. If you go back and rewatch this fight, Pereira was losing. He lost that first round against Jiri because Jiri was able to grapple him up and at sometimes hurt him on the feet. The most success that Pereira even had was with the leg kicks. He was chewing up Jiri's legs, but he still, I think, lost that first round pretty convincingly. Second round happens and he finds the finish. He finds that left hook that people were saying were so overrated at the time. Finds that left hook, gets another kind of weird stoppage. Pereira has had a trend of having weird stoppages in the UFC, but he finds that left hook. He drops Jiri for a moment, then proceeds to give him hammer fist to eventually finishing him. The finish, again, was weird, but I can't put that on Pereira. That's on Mark Goddard. Mark Goddard's the one who stopped the fight, not Alex Pereira. So he fought until the ref pulled him off. So that's totally on Mark Goddard, not Alex Pereira. And I can't knock his performance for having an iffy finish. So this fight to me ends up just being a A-. I'm not giving him an A or an A+ because of the fact that he was losing that first round, but this performance was better than the Bruno Silva one, so I'm going to give him a higher score than that because he did get a finish, whether he lost a round or not, so I have to score this higher than that fight. But again, losing that first round made things feel kind of weird, and we didn't really know if Pereira was going to go on to win that fight if he didn't hurt Jiri at that point. But he wins the belt. I think winning the belt earned you an A- at least, whether by decision or by finish, and it's an A- for me for Alex Pereira versus Jiri Prochazka. Now, moving on to his most recent fight versus Jamal Hill. This one, I'm giving you the score outright. It's an A+ for me. This is one of the best finishes of all time in UFC history at UFC 300. This is going to be remembered for decades. And when we look back at Alex Pereira's career, we will think about the Israel Adesanya finish, and we will think about this finish. I guarantee you that. This, to me, is the best Pereira performance in his entire career. He pretty much just schooled Jamal Hill, and it looked kind of easy for him. Now, he goes out there, and he pretty much gets groin striked by Jamal Hill early into the fight. Herb Dean steps in to stop it. Pereira, being the Chad man himself, goes, "No, Herb," holds his hand, tells him, "I'm good, I'm ready to go," then proceeds to just take 2 steps forward and land the meanest left hook you've ever seen from Alex Pereira. Drops down Jamal Hill really badly, then proceeds to TKO him with hammer fist and ground and pound. He gets a crazy finish at UFC 300. Again, one of the most memorable moments that we're going to have from Pereira's career, and the finish was sick. And Jamal Hill is no slouch. He was the uncrowned champion, just like how Jiri was. He never lost his belt. He had to vacate it due to injury, and he goes out there and makes it look easy. And Jamal Hill at the time was kind of looking like he was one of the worst stylistic matchups for Pereira. When it comes to Pereira fighting southpaws, he tends to struggle, and Jamal Hill was obviously a southpaw. The long range and the straight shots of Jamal Hill posed a big threat because we know Pereira's boxing defense isn't the best. People were picking Jamal Hill because he was a true threat to Alex Pereira, and he goes out there again and makes it look easy. This is an A+ for me. I don't think there's any other fight that Pereira's had in the UFC that can match this. This was for a belt. He defended his belt. This is, again, an unbelievable performance. I have to give it an A+ no matter what. So there you guys have it. That's me grading every single Alex Pereira performance that he has had in the UFC. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, hit that bell icon for notifications. Also leave a comment down below if you want to see me do another fighter in the future, or if you disagree or even agree. I don't really care. Leave a comment down below for me, but I'm out of here, guys. Peace.